Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Blade. I'm the owner of Indian River News. I'm here today with Florida State Director for Gun Owners America, Louis Valdes. Today, we're going to be discussing what the proper responses should be to the two tragedies that have happened in the past few weeks. One in Buffalo, New York, that was a horrific hate crime, and the tragedy in Uvalde, Texas, involving probably the worst elementary school shooting since Sandy Hook. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lewis. And first thing we're going to ask, though, before we get into anything, is a little bit about Gun Owners America, so that the audience understands what this organization is that Lewis works for, representing here in the state of Florida. So, Lewis, can you get into a bit of the background on Gun Owners America and what they do?
Sure. Gun Owners of America, we are the only no compromise gun rights organization in Washington, D.C. and in Tallahassee. We were founded in 1976, and our primary goal has been and always will be to secure, expand, and protect and defend the Second Amendment for all Americans. Our political stance is very simple. We don't compromise. We don't believe in trading one aspect of the Second Amendment to secure another. We believe in going for that brass ring. And part of that is securing our freedoms, not just for ourselves, but for future generations of Americans.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And even though GOA is focused on the Second Amendment, a lot of the core rights we have in the Constitution, I find those need to be upheld and protected. And specifically, too, we'll get to later in this interview, that we also need to remember to keep as much on the state level as possible and do as much we can to, in my view, keep the federal government out of our affairs on the state and local level. I've just found for myself personally that tends to work better. So with that said, what do you find is the best response to a tragedy like what happened out in Texas and Buffalo, New York? What do you find is the best response when something like that happens?
Well, there's numerous issues with both instances of what happened in Texas and New York. Both instances is they were gun-free zones. The federal Gun-Free School Zone Act makes any school basically a target-rich environment. And the state of New York has made most of their citizens a target-rich environment because, as we know, the state of New York is very, very restrictive in the issuance of concealed carry permits. They're a may issue system. There's actually currently a federal Supreme Court case that we're currently waiting on the ruling for right now as we speak, to see if New York's entire gun control scheme is unconstitutional, which has been in effect since 1911, by the way. So the idea of gun control being something recent isn't the case. It's been proven time and time again that gun control doesn't work. And in Texas's case, we've seen multiple times where schools are target rich environments. The fact that the teachers weren't armed, the fact that even though you have a school resource officer on campus, I was a 15-year veteran law enforcement officer. I was a school resource officer as part of my career as a police officer here in the state of Florida. And I can tell you, even though I would do everything that I can to protect our kids, I'm only one person on a campus. When bad things happen, it happens. And sometimes when seconds count, cops are minutes to an hour away. If we had armed teachers and staff, that could have been the deciding factor that could have prevented tragedy and loss.
And do you find having armed teachers here in the state of Florida, is that something perhaps the school districts here in the state and the state government should possibly look at expanding?
I think it should incredibly be expanded. The biggest issue here in Florida is we have the Guardian program, which sounds great on paper, but some of the school boards purposely choose not to participate in that. Instead, they would rather hire an off duty law enforcement officer and have that officer assigned to the school. And again, I am not trying to belittle my brothers and sisters in blue, but the problem is one cop for an entire campus can't cover all the grounds, all the classes, all the doorways, all the checkpoints, every gate, every access point at once. But if you expand and you allow the teachers and staff to be armed, that is a better method of security. You have a layered defense because, again, when seconds count, cops are minutes to an hour away.
Now, what about in Uvalde, Texas, though, where it's been reported that somebody higher up in the local law enforcement told them, do not go in the school? What do you know about that, and what's your response to that?
This is an unfolding situation. There's information coming up every second of every day as things progress with the investigation. And and I'm just saying this from a personal level. When I was a police officer, I would have charged in head first. No ifs, ands, or buts. Part of the training that I received was called rapid action tactics. The idea was it didn't matter if you were a uniformed patrol officer, if you were a plainclothes detective, if you were administrative staff, it didn't matter. If you were the first or second on scene and another unit showed up, even if they were from another agency, you guys went in. That is the goal. That was our training. And if, God forbid, my life was to be taken, I would rather that happen as I'm trying to protect those kids than for those kids to be hurt or injured or killed. And again, I know in talking to teachers when I was an SRO, they have the same feeling, they have the same drive, the same desire, but they have been restricted on the ability to defend the very children they've been entrusted to protect and care for.
That is definitely very interesting. I do hope that the viewers they get some value out of that. Now, with regards to the assault weapons ban that is being discussed once again at the federal level, it was from 94 to 2004 we had the previous ban, right?
Correct.
Okay. So there's talks of bringing that back again. And I think just for some context, can you, because I don't know it as well off the top of my head, would you be able to explain to the audience, Lewis, what the assault weapons ban of 94 to '04 was and talk about what current efforts are taking place within Congress?
The assault weapons ban was a frivolous piece of legislation that in no way accomplished anything whatsoever except making it harder and violating the Second Amendment rights of law abiding citizens. The assault weapons ban went after semi automatic firearms, went after standard capacity magazines. Everyone calls them high capacity, but they're standard capacity magazines because that's what they were designed to work with.
Real quick, how many rounds are in standard capacity
A
magazines?
standard capacity magazine could range from anywhere from 10 rounds to 30 rounds and in between. You have different firearms designed with different capacities. When I was a law enforcement officer, I carried a Glock 17, held 17 rounds of ammunition per each magazine. I had an AR-15 issued to me. Each magazine was 30 rounds. But here's the thing. Criminals don't care. They break the law. Nicholas Cruz, during the Parkland shooting, he used 10 round magazines in his AR-15. Why? Because the 10 rounds were physically shorter magazines and fit his rifle case. Again, magazine bans, firearm type bans, they don't stop criminals. The assault weapons ban during the Clinton administration was completely frivolous. It didn't reduce crime. What reduced crime was you had in that 10-year period states dramatically expanding the Second Amendment rights of their residents. You had an explosion in states going from may or no issue to shall issue for concealed carry. And towards the end of it, you had some states adopting constitutional carry. You had Vermont, and then you had Alaska and Arizona adopt constitutional carry. And those three states prove that you don't even need a permit for the law abiding public to be able to legally defend themselves. Because what stops bad guys is good people with firearms. Criminals break the law. Gun free zones don't work. Assault weapons bans don't work. Universal background checks don't work. Any type of gun control is an infringement on the law abiding people because it only hurts the law abiding. Again, we could look at New York, we could look at Chicago, we could look at California, we could look at Hawaii, we could look across the country. In the locations that have some of the highest crime rates, they also have the most restrictive gun laws on the books. But the states that have the most, and I'm going to use the word that people are going to hate, liberal gun laws, in which the classic word of liberal is upheld in terms of freedom, they have some of the lowest crime rates in the country. And that's because criminals will not prey on people that could potentially be armed. Your average criminal is no different than your average lion on the Serengeti of Africa. They prey on the weak and the defenseless. If every criminal suddenly thinks, man, I don't know if that guy's armed. I don't know if that old lady's armed. I don't know if that 19-year-old girl leaving the library's armed. I'm not going to risk it. That changes the game. That's a complete shift in how society functions. It's an old cliche. An armed society is a polite society because criminals prey on the weak. And if they don't know who's armed, it's a much higher risk for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I definitely agree with that 100%. Now, how likely is it that we could possibly see another assault weapons ban passed on the federal level?
Well, I can tell you this. I don't have a magic 8 ball in front of me, but here at Gun Owners of America, we are fighting tooth and nail to prevent this from happening. It's gotten to the point that let me rephrase it. It's gotten to a level that the majority of Americans understand and know that an assault weapons ban doesn't work. We already lived through it. You have members of Congress that know it's not going to work. But you have members of Congress that they don't care. They're still going to push forward. Why? Because they don't want to reduce crime. They want to disarm the public. Why do they want to disarm the public? Possibly draconian reasons, possibly despotic reasons. But in the end, they want to disarm the public. Because we could look across the country again. We could look at New York. We could look at Massachusetts. We could look at California. We could look at Chicago. We could look at the states that have implemented assault weapons ban on the state and local level. They don't work. If you look at California, California has had an assault weapons ban since 1989. Has that stopped anything? No, it hasn't. New York has had an assault weapons ban since 1994. Did that stop anything? No. The only thing it stopped is the law-abiding people from being able to legally defend themselves. Because again, criminals break the law. That's why they're criminals. And last I checked, it's been illegal to commit murder since long before Moses descended the mountain with the Ten Commandments. Some of the oldest recorded records of history, going back thousands of years, shows that one of the first laws ever written was, you won't commit murder. Guess what? People still do it. So the idea that you're going to write another frivolous law and say, oh, well, this imaginary line stops people from doing bad things. No, it doesn't. What stops bad people from doing bad things is good people being able to defend themselves. And I'm going to take it one step further. The media constantly claims, oh no, when constitutional carry is passed, when gun rights are expanded, you have a rise in murders, you have a rise in violent crime. No, what you have a rise in is the law-abiding public defending themselves from criminals. And you have the media simply taking, oh, well, there was a homicide. Guess what? Justifiable use of force in self-defense is still technically a homicide. They're just spinning the facts. And that is the truth.
Yeah, and all of that it's very useful information. And I think there's some people, yes, I definitely agree that there are people that can use gun control for draconian reasons. But I think too, there's a lot of people that are ignorant, in my view, to the possible harmful negative effects of not having an armed populace. We're supposed to be a government by the people, for the people. Obviously, I'm very much against violence, so the viewers understand. For the people that know me very well, I'm actually a very peaceful person. But I also understand too, with human nature, for our laws to be enforced, any law you pass, it has to be enforceable with force. Like, for example, prohibition, they could not enforce it with the force the United States government had. We had to pass a whole constitutional amendment to repeal another amendment, which the 18th Amendment banned alcohol, 21st Amendment turned around and repealed the 18th Amendment, the only time that's ever happened so far in American history.
Correct.
So, oh, I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Lewis?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Good. So, how can we prevent more mass shootings like what happened in Texas, New York, and others since really Columbine from happening ever again?
A lot of it has to do with how we as a society deal with three important issues. Recidivism within our criminal justice system, the way our criminal justice system completely works, and more importantly, our mental health system. And again, I'm going back to my 15 years in law enforcement. I had multiple contacts with multiple individuals that clearly were mentally disturbed. And we had a tool. It was called the Baker Act. If an individual is a threat to themselves or others, if left to their own devices, if they refuse treatment on their own accord, and if they have the means, the motive, and the opportunity, and they make statements that they're going to hurt someone or hurt themselves, then we could detain them for 72 hours. They would be taken to the nearest mental health facility and they would be evaluated and treated. Now, you had some individuals that they had a brief lapse of judgment, they had a brief break because of some traumatic issue, and within 8 hours, the doctor said, hey, look, the person's fine, the individual's okay, but they were professionally evaluated. The biggest issues that I'm seeing is everyone is worried about individuals that are mentally disturbed, that have mental handicaps, that have mental health issues. There's a public and social stigma on these individuals seeking treatment publicly. And worse, we don't have a properly funded system for these individuals to seek treatment. A lot of the individuals I ran across as a law enforcement officer were homeless and they had mental health issues. And it was basically society dumped them on police. Since they couldn't seek the treatment, these individuals, because of their mental issues, would commit crimes. They would shoplift, they would be combative, there would be domestic violence issues, there would be strong arm robbery, you name it. And in the end, the only way they sought treatment wasn't because there was a system in place for them to get treatment, it was because we slapped cuffs on them for breaking the law. And while they were in police custody, we discovered during the processing time period, while we were doing the arrest affidavit, we were doing their mugshot and all that, hey, something's not right with this individual. And we would ask them questions, and sure enough, if an individual, I want to hurt myself, I want to do this, it's like, okay. Then we would take them to the nearest facility. But here's the thing, that's after law enforcement contact. How many times, especially with Nicholas Cruz in Parkland, did the Broward County Sheriff's Office make contact with him? Did they ever Baker Act him? No. Did they ever arrest him? No. There was over 30 points of contact, and that's one of the failures in law enforcement, but that's also one of the failures within the criminal justice system as a whole. We have a revolving door policy with some of our state attorneys. Here in Florida, they're called state attorneys. In other states and other areas, you might call them district attorneys or prosecutors, but here in Florida, they're called state attorneys. And some of them have a revolving door policy where it's just in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And you have a high level of recidivism where these individuals, again, are committing crime. They're not getting the treatment they deserve, and they're out on the streets. So, and I'm hearing a lot right now about red flags. Oh, we need to have pass red flag laws to take the firearms away from these individuals. Well, here's this simple truth. If an individual wants to cause wanton harm and violence, they're going to do it with anything they can get their hands on. They're not going to use a firearm. So what is more practical? What is more correct in terms of a truly safe and free society where we restrict an individual's Second Amendment rights by violating their Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights and due process? Or if an individual is truly a danger to society, they're not on the streets and they're seeking the treatment they deserve. That's how we resolve this. It's not gun control, it's mental health initiatives. We need to get over the social stigma of not being able to use public funds to fund public care. I'm not talking about Obamacare, I'm not talking about health care or Medicare for all. I'm talking about as a society, we need to have this honest discussion. Because at some point, we're seeing the end results of what happens when we don't provide the resources for correct mental health care services. So that's what we need to discuss. We don't need to discuss gun control. It's already been proven to be false, that it doesn't work. What we need to do is have an honest discussion on mental health services and its funding.
Oh yeah, definitely for sure. And I want to go back to something you mentioned about Parkland. That is there something that what can we do to hold law enforcement accountable when mishaps happen? I know like Sheriff Scott Israel, he was removed from office by Governor DeSantis. But is there something that, or is there already something in place that holds law enforcement accountable And if needed, I'll ask about the actual state's attorney in a moment, but that holds law enforcement accountable if there's mishaps like what happened with Nicholas Cruz, and is the state's attorney involved any way with that?
It's a multifaceted problem when it comes to that. You have some instances where you have a culture within an agency that's what breeds the current system because it's just, hey, this is how we've done it and this is how we'll always do it. You have other instances where you have gross negligence, and then you just have other instances where sadly the stars aligned. And with Nicholas Cruz's case, you had multiple instances. Again, there was over 30 points of contact with law enforcement where he could have been arrested for domestic violence. He could have been arrested for strong arm, or not strong arm, I'm sorry, for aggravated battery or aggravated assault. There was multiple instances where he could have been detained, and one thing would have led to another of him possibly seeking treatment. Now, as to stop law enforcement, again, when I was a cop, I tried to do my best to serve the public and the community that I was entrusted to protect. But you do have an issue in some agencies where the higher in rank you go, you have a culture of corruption. You have a culture of politics where some things will be swept under the rug because their bosses want it done a certain way. And that's a sad truth of the reality. It doesn't matter if it's an elected sheriff. It doesn't matter if it's an appointed city chief of police. You have these issues where at some point they stop being a cop and they start being a politician, and they play the games, and they try to sweep the stats. They try to correlate their stats a certain way to make things look a certain way. And because of that, some things are swept under the rug or are underreported or not reported. And in Nicholas Cruz's case, you had the Obama administrative era prison or pipeline to prison program, basically, where the Obama administration, through the Department of Justice, didn't want certain individuals to have an official criminal record because they didn't want these individuals to go to jail. So what happened was in Nicholas Cruz's case, things that would have been an arrestable offense were swept under the rug or were underreported. And that just basically cascaded into the system failure that we saw with him. And you also had the simple issue of Sheriff Scott Israel. He changed agency policy from you will go into an active shooter situation to you may go into an active shooter situation. I'm sorry. Again, as a cop, when I rose my right hand and I took that oath to protect and defend the Constitution and serve the public that entrusted me and vested me with that authority, I'm going in. The fact that he changed agency policy to say you may, you might, you could, you don't have to. That is an issue with command staff. And luckily, we have a system in place where, as you saw, Sheriff Israel was removed immediately by Governor DeSantis. So again, I give great kudos to the governor for stepping up to the plate and doing what needed to be done with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. That was like one of the best things the governor did in the very beginning of his governorship was to remove Sheriff Israel. And ironically, that guy doesn't he have a gig now as a police chief down in Miami-Dade?
I believe the city of Opelika hired him to be the chief of police. I'm not 100% sure if it was the city of Opelika, but yeah, I heard through my law enforcement contacts that Israel is still holding active CGSTC certification, and he has sworn with an agency, and he's leading it. So whoever lives in whatever jurisdiction he's currently going over, you folks need to put pressure on your city commission or your town hall, whatever your system of government is for your municipality, and you need to get rid of him ASAP. He's not good for you.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree for sure. And the last thing I want to ask about is what's the latest on constitutional carry, and do you find we will get that special session this year?
So, constitutional carry, for folks that don't know, it's a very simple premise. If you are a law-abiding individual and you can legally own a firearm, you can legally carry it, whether it's open or concealed. 25 states have passed constitutional carry. And the latest two was Georgia and Alabama. So every tourist that drives to Florida now will be passing through a constitutional carry jurisdiction, first and foremost. Secondly, we have some Republican lawmakers, sadly. One of them is Representative David Smith. I believe he's out in Seminole County, a little bit to the west of us. He said he's against constitutional carry because of the tourist dollars, specifically international tourists. Mind you, according to Visit Florida, the state agency, or it's really not an agency, it's more of a state run business, they track the amount of tourists that come to Florida. Only 4% of tourists were international tourists. So he is bending knee to 4% of international tourists versus the other 96% of tourists, who are Americans, by the way, that come and visit Florida. And, Second Amendment rights don't end at our border. They have the same rights as we do. And more importantly, these are tourists coming from states that have open carry and that have constitutional carry. So if it was such an issue in their states, they wouldn't have passed it. But he believes that it's going to scare them away if we have it. So that's one of the issues. We have a number of Republican lawmakers. David Smith is one of them. We have others. The list is not long, but sadly it's not short. And I would love to go over all the names, but we just don't have enough time for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for
But
sure. That would be a whole separate discussion too on all the people that
yeah,
there's an issue with.
but Governor DeSantis, he wants to pass it. He said before he leaves office, he will get it done. But sadly, after he said that, when he was discussing the possibility of a special session, he says, I think the votes aren't there right now. Now that says something. We have a 160 member legislature. And out of that, 102 of them are Republicans. The Republicans have a supermajority. The Republican National Party platform is to pass constitutional carry. And you had a governor that said, I support it, I want it passed, I want to sign it. And he's then saying, I don't think we have the votes to get it passed. That means you have Republican lawmakers that are not upholding, one, the governor's directive on this, and two, their own party platform. And going back to Representative Dave Smith, for example, his own county and his own district, Seminole County, their REC passed a constitutional carry resolution supporting its passage. So you even have some lawmakers that aren't supporting the very county level Republicans that support their own campaigns. So that's an issue we have. Now, do I think we could get it next year? I think so. As for a special session, I would love for it to happen right now. But it only happens if you, the viewer, put pressure on your lawmaker first and foremost. Because you have a lot of them that are squishy. They claim they have a backbone, but I don't know. We've seen some that they don't. So for this to happen, you, the viewer, you need to put pressure on your lawmakers for that to happen. You need to reinforce the notion and let them know that you support Governor DeSantis on this.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And that's why I say to anybody, if you have something that you want to see put forward, whether it be constitutional carry or a separate issue, and of course keeping in mind whether it be state or federal, just make sure if the state issue goes to our two people represent us on the state level or the three people that represent us on the federal level, they make sure that goes to the right place. So I would say, a phone call, like for the state people, I would call their district offices, and for the federal people, you want to call their Washington D.C. offices, because on the district, as long as they're not in session, the district offices are usually the best bet to go and call, because that's usually where their legislative aides, their district staffers, that's where they are because we have a part-time legislature here in the state of Florida, so they're not legislating the whole year. It's only a small portion of the year that they're actually passing legislation. And for our Congressman Bill Posey and our two senators, Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, they always have staff at their Washington, D.C. offices. And the Washington, D.C. offices handle all legislative matters. The district offices are typically for casework. So that's where the federal people, you want to go and call the Washington, D.C. offices. With that all said, Lewis, thank you very much for joining me today for this interview, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you for having me on today.
Of course, take care.